The pursuit of happiness as the ultimate goal is a theme that permeates much of our society. We grow up hearing that we should pursue happiness, that it is the ultimate goal in life. But is this really true? Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychologist and Holocaust survivor, argues that the pursuit of happiness as the ultimate goal is actually a trap. When we make happiness our main goal, we start to focus on how we feel in each moment. This leads us to a life of constantly seeking pleasures and experiences that make us feel good. But in doing so, we are losing sight of what truly matters. We are losing sight of the purpose, the meaning of life. Happiness is not something we can achieve directly. It is a byproduct of a life well lived. Furthermore, when happiness is our main goal, we start comparing ourselves to others. We start seeing how happy others are, and we start feeling inferior. This leads us to a life of competition, where we are constantly trying to outdo others. But this is not life. It is a never-ending race. It is a race that we can never win, because there will always be someone happier than us. The pursuit of happiness also leads us to a life of comfort. We start focusing on how we feel. We start avoiding anything that makes us feel uncomfortable. This leads us to a life of mediocrity, where we are no longer challenging ourselves. We are no longer growing. We are no longer learning. We are just existing. Viktor Frankl argues that instead of seeking happiness, we should seek meaning. The meaning of life is what gives us purpose. It is what gives us direction. When we find meaning, happiness comes as a byproduct. It is not the ultimate goal. It is the result of a life well lived. This does not mean that we should not seek happiness, but rather that we should seek happiness in a deeper way. We should seek the happiness that comes from a life of purpose, from a life of meaning. When we think about happiness, we often find ourselves on a quest for it, as if it were a destination to be reached. We want to feel fulfilled, content and satisfied, and so we strive to achieve goals, achieve objectives, and accumulate experiences. However, paradoxically, the more we pursue happiness, the less we find it. This is because happiness is not a destination, but rather a side effect of a life well lived. The more we fixate on the idea that happiness is something we can achieve, the more we become victims of our own expectations. We expect things to happen a certain way, people to be the way we want them to be, and circumstances to be favorable. And when these expectations are not met, we feel disappointed, frustrated, and unhappy. Since life is unpredictable and full of surprises, it is inevitable that these expectations will be constantly dashed. Furthermore, the relentless pursuit of happiness can lead us to a life of superficiality. We want exciting experiences. We want to feel fulfilled, but we are not willing to do the hard work to commit to a life of purpose. We want the results without having to go through the process. And so we become experts at making ourselves happy for a short period of time. But we don't know how to create a life that is truly satisfying. The result is a life of constant searching, constant dissatisfaction, and constant unhappiness. The truth is that happiness is not something we can control or force. It comes when we are living a life that makes sense, when we are committed to values and purposes that go beyond our own wants and needs. Happiness is a side effect of a purposeful life, not an end in itself. And it is precisely when we stop chasing happiness that we can begin to truly experience it. The search for happiness and the search for meaning are two concepts that are often confused or used as synonyms, but in fact, they have radically different meanings and objectives. When we are searching for happiness, we are, most of the time, looking for a feeling of pleasure, comfort, or satisfaction. We want to feel good. We want to have good health, a good family, a good job, a good house. In short, we want to have all the things that according to our society, should bring us happiness. But Viktor Frankl warns us that this search can be a mistake, because happiness is not something we can achieve directly. Instead, happiness is a byproduct of something much deeper and more meaningful. The search for meaning, on the other hand, is a much deeper and more meaningful journey. When we are searching for meaning, we are looking for a purpose, a reason to be here, a reason to continue living. Meaning is not something we can achieve in place of happiness, but rather something that can give meaning to our lives, even when we are not feeling happy. One of the main differences between these two pursuits is that the pursuit of happiness is often selfish, while the pursuit of meaning is often altruistic. When we are in pursuit of happiness, we are thinking about ourselves, our needs and desires. When we are in pursuit of meaning, we are thinking about something bigger than ourselves. We are thinking about how we can contribute to the world, how we can leave a legacy. Furthermore, the search for happiness can be very superficial, as it is based on external circumstances, such as our financial situation, our health, our relationships, etc. The search for meaning, on the other hand, is much deeper, as it is based on values, beliefs, and principles. When we are searching for meaning, we are looking for a connection with something greater than ourselves. We are looking for a reason to be here. In short, the search for happiness is a search for a feeling, an emotion, while the search for meaning is a search for a purpose, a reason. And it is precisely this difference that Viktor Frankl warns us not to chase happiness, but rather to discover meaning. When we think about finding meaning, our minds often go to happy places where life is easy and pleasurable. However, Viktor Frankl teaches us that true discovery of meaning comes from deeper places, places where life is difficult and challenging. It is precisely in these places that we can find the true purpose of our lives. Suffering and challenges are inevitable parts of life. No matter how successful we are or how happy we are, we will face challenges and suffer at some point. And it is in these moments that we can choose how we respond. We can choose to surrender to the pain and frustration, or we can choose to use these challenges as opportunities for growth and discovery. When we face a challenge, our minds start to work differently. We start to think more creatively, find innovative solutions, and develop skills we never knew we had. And it is precisely in this process that we can find the true meaning of our lives. For example, imagine that you are an artist who has always dreamed of exhibiting your work in a famous art gallery. However, you suffer an accident that leaves you unable to paint for a while. You can either surrender to the pain and loss, or you can choose to use this time to develop other skills, such as writing or teaching. And it is precisely in this process that you may discover a new purpose, a new way of expressing your art. Furthermore, suffering and challenge also give us the opportunity to find meaning in our lives. When we face a challenge, we can choose to give meaning to what we are going through. We can choose to see pain as a gift, as an opportunity for growth and discovery. For example, imagine that you are going through a serious illness. You can choose to see the illness as a punishment, or you can choose to see it as an opportunity to discover what is most important in your life. You can choose to give meaning to the pain by seeing it as an opportunity to connect with others, to deepen your spirituality, or to discover new skills. In short, suffering and challenge are inevitable parts of life. However, it is precisely in these places that we can find true meaning in our lives. We can choose how we respond to difficulties, we can choose to give meaning to pain, and we can choose to use challenges as opportunities for growth and discovery. Freedom of choice in the face of adversity is a concept that Viktor Frankl developed throughout his life, especially during his experience in the Nazi concentration camps. For Frankl, freedom of choice is not a matter of material or physical circumstances, but rather of internal choices that can be made independently of external conditions. In other words, even when we are locked in a cell or facing a serious illness, we still have the freedom to choose how we respond to these situations. This idea may seem counterintuitive, as our natural tendency is to blame our circumstances for our unhappiness. However, Frankl argues that this approach makes us victims of our circumstances rather than the authors of our lives. Instead of focusing on changing our circumstances, we should focus on changing our attitude toward them. We can choose how we interpret situations, how we respond to them, and how we turn them into opportunities for growth. One example of this is the story of a prisoner who was forced to work in a concentration camp. Instead of resigning himself to his fate, he began to help other prisoners, even if it meant risking his own life. This internal choice gave him purpose and a sense of meaning, even in a seemingly hopeless situation. This does not mean that the external circumstances changed, but rather that he changed his relationship to them. This freedom of choice can also be exercised in more everyday situations. For example, when we lose our job, we can choose to resign ourselves to our misfortune or use this opportunity to reevaluate our priorities. We can choose to cling to the past or focus on the future. We can choose to be victims of our circumstances or the authors of our lives. These internal choices can completely change the way we live and experience life. Furthermore, freedom of choice also allows us to find deeper meaning in our lives. When faced with adversity, we can choose to focus on the suffering or seek deeper meaning. We can choose to hold on to the pain or use it as an opportunity for growth. This does not mean that the pain disappears, but rather that it becomes a catalyst for a new understanding of ourselves and the world. In short, freedom of choice in the midst of adversity is an internal choice that we can make at any time. It is a choice that allows us to change our attitude towards circumstances, find deeper meaning in our lives, and become the authors of our own stories. When we think about achieving happiness, our minds naturally turn to the future. We think that if we just achieve this goal, or win over this person, or reach this level of success, then and only then will we find happiness. But Viktor Frankl reminds us that this approach is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. Instead of chasing happiness, we should focus on the present moment. The reason for this is that the present is the only time in which we can exert control over our lives. The future is uncertain, and the past is history. The more we focus on the future, the more we distance ourselves from the present, and the more we lose control over our lives. This can lead to a life of anxiety and expectation, rather than a life of action and achievement. Furthermore, when we focus on the future, we are implicitly saying that we are not satisfied with life as it is now. We are saying that we need something more, something better, something different. This can lead to a life of chronic dissatisfaction, where we are never truly present in our lives. Instead, we must learn to find meaning and fulfillment in the present moment, regardless of the circumstances that are happening in our lives. An example of this is when we are doing something we love, when we are completely immersed in an activity that brings us pleasure. We are not thinking about the future or the past. We are simply present in the moment, enjoying the experience. It is in this moment that we can find true happiness, not because we have achieved a goal, but because we are fully present in our lives. So instead of chasing happiness, we should focus on finding meaning and fulfillment in the present moment. This doesn't mean we shouldn't have goals or dreams, but rather that we should learn to find happiness along the way, not just at the destination. The search for meaning as a way to overcome suffering is a concept that Viktor Frankl developed in his theory of logotherapy. According to Frankl, the search for meaning is not just a way to find happiness or pleasure, but rather a way to find a greater purpose that transcends suffering. When we are facing difficulties, it is natural to focus on overcoming suffering. But Frankl warns us that this approach can be counterproductive. Instead of focusing on avoiding suffering, we should focus on finding a greater meaning that gives our lives meaning. This does not mean that we should ignore or deny suffering, but rather that we should learn to find a greater purpose that transcends it. For example, when we are facing a serious illness, instead of focusing on overcoming the pain and suffering, we can find greater meaning in helping others who are going through the same suffering. Additionally, the search for meaning can also help us find a way to deal with suffering more effectively. When we focus on finding a greater purpose, we can find a way to transform suffering into something positive. For example, Viktor Frankl, in his experience in the concentration camps, found greater meaning in helping other prisoners find a greater purpose in life, even in the midst of suffering. This does not mean that the suffering disappeared, but rather that he found a way to transform it into something positive. This approach can be much more effective than simply trying to avoid suffering. When we focus on finding a greater purpose, we can find a way to overcome suffering more effectively. Furthermore, the search for meaning can also help us find a way to find inner peace, even in the midst of suffering. When we are focused on finding a greater purpose, we can find a way to accept suffering as a part of life, rather than something we should avoid at all costs. When we think about finding meaning in life, we often focus on feeling good, on achieving a kind of permanent state of euphoria. However, Viktor Frankl warns us that the search for happiness can, in itself, be a source of suffering. This is because when we make it our main goal, we are actually creating an expectation that may never be fulfilled. Instead, Frankl invites us to look at life in a completely different way. He suggests that instead of focusing on finding happiness, we should focus on finding meaning. And this is where the relationship between meaning and responsibility comes into play. You will see, when you take responsibility for your choices and actions, you begin to discover that the meaning of life is not in achieving a state of happiness, but in living according to your values and principles. This means that instead of waiting for life to give you something, you take responsibility for creating something with your own life. And that is what gives you a sense of purpose. It is as if you are building a building, stone by stone, and as you do so, you discover that the building you are building is actually your own life. But for this to happen, you need to be willing to face the challenges and difficulties that arise along the way. And this is where responsibility comes into play. You can't just wait for things to happen. You need to take the initiative and create opportunities. And in doing so, you discover that the meaning of life is not in avoiding problems, but in facing them with courage and determination. Therefore, the relationship between meaning and responsibility is fundamental. It is responsibility that allows us to find meaning in life. It is responsibility that allows us to live according to our values and principles. And it is responsibility that allows us to create our own lives rather than simply waiting for things to happen. When we think about discovering meaning, we often imagine a journey that will take us to a specific place, as if we were looking for a key that will allow us to access a secret door. However, discovering meaning is not a journey that takes us to a place, but rather a journey that transforms us. It is a journey that makes us question our values, our beliefs, and our priorities. It is a journey that makes us confront our fears, our insecurities, and our doubts. And it is precisely in this process of questioning and confrontation that we discover what is truly important to us. Viktor Frankl teaches us that meaning is not something we can find in a place or in a person. Meaning is something that arises from our own experience, our own pain, and our own struggle that allows us to find purpose. And it is precisely in this process of struggle that we find our identity, our personality, and our uniqueness. Discovering meaning is a journey that makes us discover who we are, what we want, and what we need. It is a journey that makes us understand that we are not the same as anyone else and that we cannot be replaced by anyone else. We are unique, and it is precisely this uniqueness that allows us to find our purpose. And it is important to remember that discovering meaning is not a journey that has an end. It is a journey that continues throughout our lives. It is a journey that makes us grow, that makes us learn, and that makes us evolve. It is a journey that makes us understand that meaning is not something we find, but rather something we create in each moment. Therefore, the discovery of meaning is not a search for a thing or a place, but rather a search for oneself. It is a search for our own identity, our own uniqueness, and our own purpose. It is a search that makes us understand that we are the only ones capable of creating our own meaning, and that it is precisely in this creation that we find our true happiness. When you find your purpose, a profound transformation occurs within you. It's as if you found the key to unlocking your true potential. Suddenly, the things that once seemed important, like status, money, and power, lose their value. You begin to see that these things are just a means to an end, not the end in themselves. This transformation begins to happen when you start connecting with your purpose. It's as if you've found a new purpose for yourself, something that goes beyond your own existence. You begin to see that your life is not just about you, but about how you can contribute to others. This completely changes the way you view life. When you find your purpose, you begin to feel more fulfilled. You begin to feel like you've found your true calling. This doesn't mean that you no longer face challenges or obstacles, but that you have a sense of direction and meaning. You begin to feel more confident and secure in yourself. One of the most interesting things about this transformation is that it can happen at any time. It doesn't matter if you're 20 or 80, you can find your purpose and start living a more meaningful life. This is what Viktor Frankl means when he talks about finding meaning. He's not talking about finding an easy or comfortable life, but rather finding a life with purpose and meaning. When you find your purpose, you begin to feel more connected to others. You begin to feel like you are part of something bigger than yourself. This creates a sense of community and connection with others. You begin to feel more empathetic and understanding of others, and you begin to see that you are not alone in the world. This transformation can be very powerful. It can completely change the way you view life. You begin to see that life is not just about you, but about how you can contribute to others. This creates a sense of purpose and meaning that can completely transform your life. And then you discovered that the pursuit of happiness was only a shadow of what you truly sought. You discovered that meaning is what gives meaning to your life, and that it is in that meaning that you find true freedom. It is not a fleeting sensation, but a conscious choice that you make in every moment. You have learned that suffering and challenge are integral parts of the journey to meaning, and that it is in these moments that you have the opportunity to choose how you will respond. You have discovered that responsibility is the key to unlocking meaning, and that it is in this responsibility that you become the author of your own story. And now, you are here, in the present moment, with the opportunity to choose again. You can choose to continue chasing happiness, or you can choose to discover your purpose, your meaning. What will you choose? Remember, the search for meaning is not a destination. It is a journey, and it is on this journey that you transform yourself, that you discover yourself, that you find your true self. So, Don't chase happiness anymore. Find your meaning, find who you are, find your purpose, and you will discover that happiness was just a byproduct of your journey to meaning. Now that you've discovered your meaning, don't waste any more time chasing happiness. Share this with a friend or family member who needs to discover their purpose. Leave a comment below about how the video changed your perspective or what you learned from Viktor Frankl. Subscribe to the channel to receive new inspiring and thought-provoking videos. And if you're ready for more, click the link in the description to watch another video that will help you find your way. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.